Hello everyone, a movie is like a life story. He is glamorous and respected on stage, but others scorn him off the stage. Today I want to tell you a story called Green Book, a movie adapted from real life in the United States. In 1962, it was still an era where racial discrimination was severe. Tony worked as a waiter in a nightclub. This nightclub would always need to close for several months due to various reasons causing him out of a job. He still needs to pay rent and living expenses. When he reached home one day, he saw the African workers hired by his wife use their glasses at home. After they left, he threw the glasses used by them into the trash bin. To earn money, Tony begged with others to eat 26 hot dogs at once. He won $50, but such earning was not for long term. Therefore, he had put priority to find a new job. It happened that someone was looking for a driver, and the wages were high. But what Tony didn't expect was the recruitment came from an African pianist. You must know that Tony despised the black people in his heart, thinking they were low level. But the attractive reward eventually made him succumb. All Tony had to do was write for pianist Don, who would start a piano tour performance in New York. Tony knew that the trip would not be so pleasant and needed more preparation as they moved to the south. Don's music partner gave Tony a green book. This book is a guide for black people traveling. Before leaving, Tony's wife asked him to promise to write to her every week and come home before Christmas. Tony and Don started the journey. Tony's carefree characters smoked cigarettes and chewed food in the car, making Don very unpleasant. However, based on his character, he would not show his emotions. Tony also despised Don. But Tony had to do his job well because of the employment relationship. When Tony saw Don's performance for the first time, the feeling of appreciation emerged unconsciously. He began to admire Don's talents from the bottom of his heart. Nevertheless, Tony was still the same. He would take advantage of the break time, secretly playing cards and gambling with other drivers and workers. When Don saw it, he was furious. He told Tony that those people's origin determines their status, but he wanted him to see himself as different from them. He did not know if Tony understood it. While stopping for a rest, Tony picked a memorial stone on the floor. He secretly hid it in a pocket, but Don happened to see it. Don said that it seems to him was stealing behavior. Tony argued that he picked it up from the floor and didn't steal it. Don asked why he needed to do this. If he liked it, he could buy him one. On the way, Tony saw a KFC shop. He bought a family bucket and gave Tom a piece of fried chicken. Don didn't know how to start as he had never tried fried chicken in the car. Tony told Don that too many rules governing led to missing many exciting things in the world. Under Tony's instigation, Don held the fried chicken in his hand and ate with hands for the first time. He liked and thought that the taste was delicious. Tony opened the window with a smile. He told Don to throw the bones out of the window. Before the performance, Tony was responsible for checking if the piano was of the same brand specified in the contract. During the inspection, he discovered that it was a piano without brand and reputations. Tony informed the administrator about the dispute. The administrator said arrogantly that black people could only be equipped with such a quality piano. Tony angrily fought with him. This method seems to work. Before the performance, the manager replaced the piano as per the contract. As they spent more time together, Tony learns more about Don. Don married earlier. He could not sustain his marriage due to his busy work. Every night, Don drank alone. Don had a brother, but he never contacted him. He thought that his brother should know his contact number. He had never taken initiative to call him. Don would try to break the enlightenment of white people towards black people, but he dare not take the initiative to contact his family. The contradiction of human nature made Don a reserved person. Tony saw it thoroughly. He said that there were too many lonely people in the world who were afraid to take the first step. As they moved further to the south, the green book he received earlier became handy. Regardless of the status, as long as you are black, you can only live in certain places. Don, who was in suit and leather shoes, looked out of place in the living space. The black people insulted him to act rich. He left, waiting to find a place for rest. In a bar, the gangster ridiculed him. Fortunately, Tony was experienced. He lied to the gangster that he would shoot using a gun. He managed to rescue Don. On the next performance journey, the car had to stop halfway due to an overheated engine. On the roadside was a farm with a group of blacks working very hard. Don in suits got out of the car to take a breath. The black people were looking at what happened on the road with strange eyes. On one side was a black farmer who was sweating profusely, and on the other side was a well-dressed, elegant black artist. They had the same skin color but have a different life and destiny. Don was a respected artist on stage, but he was still the black man in the population after stepping off the stage. He was not even qualified to go to the bathroom in the performance theater. He asked Tony to send him back to his own hotel's bathroom. Tony couldn't understand why Don would tolerate such an insult. Don's music partner told Tony that Don could have been in more significant performance stage than this, but he chose to come here. Tony didn't understand why such decisions. After days on the road, Tony didn't forget his promise to write to his wife. Don was full of disgust when he saw the letter written by Tony. He began to teach Tony to write letters with romantic love and sentimental wording to send home for his wife. The sales assistant refused to let Don try on a suit in a men's boutique, making Don feel the discrimination and insult again. At night, Tony received a call from police stations. Don was arrested, the reason being he was sharing the same room with a man. Tony knew that he could not give bribery to the police, but he knew how to handle the police with his experience. Tony rescued Don, but Don couldn't understand what Tony did, and the two started quarreling. On the next day, Tony met an old friend outside the hotel. He jokingly asked him to find a new job for him. Don was very nervous when he heard about it. He offered higher wages to keep Tony, but Tony told Don to rest assured that he did not intend to leave. Don apologized to Tony for what happened at the police station last night. Tony explained that he had worked in New York nightclubs for most of his life. He understood that the world was complex and diverse. The two have a deeper understanding of each other now. Don also told Tony that he used to be best at playing classical music, but whites disagreed with a black man to play their classical music. That was why he turned to a pop music. Tony told Don that he did well, regardless of the music he played. Christmas was approaching, and on a rainy night, a police car blocked their way for checking. Tony explained their journey to the police, but the police showed a mockery face when he saw Don. Tony couldn't help but to beat the police. Then both were sent to the police stations. Even though Don did not make a mistake, the police who had the black disliked Don and made the incident became Don's fault. In the end, Don called his president's younger brother to get them released. Tony was proud he got rescued by the president, but to Don this was not acceptable, as he relied on relationship to solve his troubles. Finally, the last performance would be approaching. After this, Tony could go home to celebrate Christmas with his family. Don was given a small dressing table to get ready for the performance. Don accepted without any complaints. While in the restaurant, Don's music partner told Tony that Don knew that racial discriminations against the black would worsen as he traveled to the South, but he still chose this Southern tour. He wanted to experience breaking through his comfort zone and using his action to influence and defend black dignity. Because Don understood that talents alone was not enough, and it took courage to change people's minds. It is because of this courage he came so far. Before the performance started, Don's voice and the restaurant owner came from a distance. Don was not allowed to dine here. Don decided not to perform anymore this time since there were such discriminations. The man asked Tony to persuade Don to continue with the performance. Tony woke up with Don, and this time Don won his true dignity. They went to a bar to drink. People were curious about Don's identity since he was wearing a suit. When he started to play the piano, the crowd began to dance to the music. Don could be himself. He did not need to follow the contract terms. He could finally play his favorite music. Tony, who promised his wife would go home on Christmas Eve, drove eagerly towards home. At this time, a police car stopped them again. This time, the police only reminded them the tire had flattened and wished them Merry Christmas. The snow was getting heavier, and the car moved very slowly. Tony was getting tired. To make Tony reach home on Christmas Eve, Don continued the drive. When he arrived at Tony's doorstep, he refused Tony's invitation to go into his house. He moved away and sat in an empty house. Don then remembered what Tony had said. He took the courage for initiative step bravely. At this time, the doorbell of Tony's house rang, and Don came in with a Christmas gift. The black guests surprised everyone, but they gave Don a seat. At this time, Tony's wife gave Don a big hug, thanking him for the letters Tony wrote. Tony changed from racial discrimination to understanding and defending the black people. Don also learned to take the initiative and protect its dignity. Those discriminations and prejudices are so powerless and painful to the world. We should make judgment by looking less at people's appearance and using more of our feelings. Well, that's all my story today. See you next time. Bye!